Here we are in Albany, New York, missing you all so very much and feeling extremely sad that we are not able to be at our wonderful Linlithgow Folk Festival. Last year after the festival, we took a tour of the North Coast 500, and after returning, we wrote this story.
Meeting all of you has been magical, and the magic happened again last year in Scotland for us.
So last year, after the festival, we took a tour of the North Coast 500 in Scotland.
500 miles of the most delightful, spectacular scenery with the North Coast, the North Sea on our right and the Highlands on our left. And when we go over to Scotland, I get to drive a car with a manual transmission, a stick shift, which is something I can't do over here, and I just love driving it.
Our first stop was the Black Isle, which is a stretch of land north of Inverness. It was also the home of Hugh Miller, who was a geologist.
And my patron saint.
And we were staying at an Airbnb there. Now, Airbnb gave us directions to the place. But a few days before we arrived, we got an email from our hosts telling us to ignore the directions that Airbnb had given us and to follow theirs.
They lived in a very rural area on the Black Isle, a place that we would, in this country, would call the sticks. The signage was in need of reconstruction and repainting, but we did eventually manage to get to the Airbnb, checked in, unloaded the car, and got to meet our hosts, left everything in the room, including our traveling companion, Oodles, who put up a little bit of a fuss, and then we headed out for dinner.
Oodles, do you remember Oodles? He's our good luck charm, and we left him back in the Airbnb. We should have taken him with us. Well, we had a delicious dinner. And then at 8 o'clock, we went out to our car. The weather had changed. It was dark and rainy. It was a very dramatic change, as is often the case in the Highlands of Scotland. But we were confident. We started to follow our host's directions. We went around the tour roundabout, went straight for 3 miles, took a right onto a single-track road, followed along, couldn't see any of the signs, and got completely lost. So we tried again. We found our way to the tour roundabout, went through it, went straight for 3 miles, found another single-track road, and again got completely lost. Well, we headed toward Inverness, which was a little bit south, and made a 180 and came back, figured maybe a running start would help, went through the tour roundabout. You get the idea. We went through that roundabout probably 4 or 5 times. By this time, it was 11 o'clock at night, and I was beginning to panic. I started to envision us sleeping by the side of the road in the car, or worse yet, in a damp and open field.
Well, as you know, Inverness is a fairly large city, and we really weren't that far from it. So we decided to drive into town and stop and see if we could somehow contact the police department and see if they could either give us good directions on how to get back to the Airbnb, or at least direct us to a suitable hotel or motel for the night.
Frank was delighted. He was beginning to imagine himself going up to a hotel with his companion, who he considered a beautiful woman, and no luggage.
Well, we stopped at an all-night petrol station, went in and greeted the woman behind the counter, and we explained the predicament. And she handed me the phone, dialed the phone number for the police department. And I stood there, just listening to the recording over and over and over.
There was another customer in the shop, and she came over to make her purchases. And she had overheard some of our conversation and asked us where we were going. So I pulled out my phone and showed her the directions. She read them, looked up at us and smiled and said, "I know where that is. I don't live very far from there. I'll take you."
She had been working that night as an usher at the Eden Court Theater in Inverness, and before heading home, she'd stopped at this petrol station to pick up some groceries and, more importantly, some cat food.
At that moment, if she had sprouted wings and a halo, I wouldn't have been in the least bit surprised. Well, I got into her car and Frank followed in ours. And she and I just talked nonstop. Within about 20 minutes, she had us to our Airbnb. I recognized it. I felt so relieved and delighted. At that point, I extended my hand and I said, "By the way, my name is Dee. What's yours?" We asked Anne if she might be available the next day because we thought it would be great to take her to lunch to show our gratitude and appreciation. And she was available. And so the next afternoon, the three of us went around the Black Isle. She took us places and explained things to us that Frank and I would never have discovered on our own. It was a wonderful afternoon.
Well, continuing our drive on the North Coast 500, 2 days later, we arrived in the town of Betty Hill, which coincidentally is the home of Steve, who's Anne's boyfriend. And that evening, she had driven up 2.5 hours from Inverness so that we could all get together the next morning so that we could meet Steve and we could all have breakfast together.
Steve is delightful. We enjoyed him so much. And when we parted, we all said we really need to keep in touch. Well, we've done that. And in the first email that he sent to us, he recapped the way we met.
Yes, apparently we haven't known each other very long. Perhaps we are under the influence of some unwritten rule of kindred spirits, a drawing together of like minds. Or maybe it's just that chance encounter, mixed with a bit of human friendship. But what does matter is the fact that we all did meet. But Steve closed with,
Just think, if you two had had any sense of direction or any ability with map reading, this never would have come about. Thanks, Steve.
Slanja.
Slanja.